Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to Business and Finance segment. Today on the show, we'll be looking at quite a number of issues that are happening on the financial space in the country and also outside the country. I am Sarah Elisha Dasho, and starting with some of things that have been happening on the financial space, we shall be looking at first and foremost the fuel subsidy removal, and this is coming as the Nigerian government have promised to remove the fuel subsidy come June this year, and this is coming from the CPPE, where they said that the fuel subsidy removal will improve Nigerians' revenue by at least 6 trillion naira. And they proposed the plan to remove the petroleum subsidy will improve the Nigerians' government revenue by at least 6 trillion naira annually. And this is coming from the Center of Promotion of Private Enterprises, Mr. Yusuf. He noted that the Nigerian economy is heavily burdened and crumbled by two major subsidy regimes, that is the fuel subsidy regime and the foreign exchange subsidy regime. And it's very important at a time like this because the boss added that the huge sum of revenue put at a minimum of 6 trillion naira can actually be realized to other subsidy program if appropriate reforms are being implemented. I know that it's very important at a time like this to look at the removal of the first subsidy removal. If we will recall that last week we had where the Labour Party candidate of Nigeria stated that the issue of the first subsidy is really a kind of an organized crime, because if we should look at removing the fuel subsidy, then we can use the money we realize from that sector to actually look at, revitalizing other sectors such as the agriculture, the education, the transport, the aviation, and other sectors. And here we can see that the boss of the CPPE is actually adding up his voice to saying that if the fuel subsidy removal is implemented, the country will realize about 6 trillion naira annually. You know what that means to the country, right? At a time where there is a lot left, right, and center about recession and also inflation that have been going on in the country for quite a number of time. So we know it's very important at a time like this that the country looks inwardly to see what does that mean at a time like this if the first subsidy removal is actually implemented. And he added by saying that this action will unlock a minimum of 6 trillion naira into the Federation account annually, and it will end the several years of pondering of the nation's resources through the subsidy regime. And we know he also said that the subsidy regime will actually is a short term in the foreign exchange policy, and also that it's very, very important that we don't just say we are removing it, but then that the government will put their hands together to make sure that the right things are done in the right places. And no wonder today on the papers where we saw that lots of experts that actually say whoever will be wearing the shoes for the election, talking about the president of Nigeria in the 2023 election, is very, very paramount that he knows the responsibilities that are actually awaiting him. And I will actually say that I totally agree, because there are a lot that needs to be done. If we are talking about removing the first subsidy, then we have to also look at the fact that our refineries are still lying idle. We still have to also look at the fact that we depend so much on the oil sector. So at a time like this, where we also saw that Nigeria is actually topping in the oil and gas industry, and we are also seeing the fact that lots of things need to be done to make sure that we're able to, resurrect some of our refineries that are lying idle, our textile industry, our steel mining, and other sectors, so we can, kind of a way of relieving the burden on the oil and gas sector. So it's very important at a time like this that the government looks inwardly to make sure that right now, as we are removing the subsidy of the fuel, what is the next step forward? And this is one of the issues that the CPPE, boards actually, raise, and actually saying it's very important that we look inwardly. Another thing he actually looked at the fact is looking at our foreign exchange subsidy, because it's very important at a time like this that we look at what does that mean actually looking at our looking at the foreign exchange, because this is another point. He actually said that lots of money is being lost, not just in the first subsidy, but also looking at our foreign exchange. And we know that our foreign exchange is very, very important because it tells a lot about the health of the nation and also about the welfare of the people that lives in it. We know that the foreign exchange is talking about conversion of one's country currency to another. And then you know that there are lots of other factors that actually, look into that, depend on what the foreign exchange, means at a time like this. Because we've been looking at the Forex, looking at the fact that our Naira is weak, looking at the fact that if you look at the ratio of the Naira to the dollar, it actually has been fluctuating, especially when you go to the black market, you know how much you buy a dollar to the Naira. And so it's important that we look at what does that mean to the country at a point like this. If the CPPE boss have actually said we have to look into our foreign exchange, the Forex, and how it actually affects and also contribute to the welfare of the country at a time like this, then you will know that it's important that Nigeria look inwardly, the CBN look inwardly, not just about our interest rate, but we also have to look at our foreign exchange rate in relation to the Naira and to the dollar. And we know that, in other words, we have to look at the value that has been set by the government of the day at a time like this. Now let's look at the fact that many countries actually float their currency freely against those of other countries. Especially, let's take a look at, for example, if a tourist is into the country, definitely he or she have to change his local currency to the currency of the country he is in. And the more foreign money that is being exchanged to the local currency in the country, that will help to actually boost the GDP of the country. That will actually help the country to be healthy. Because if you should look at the way Nigeria is presently, we will say that the economy of Nigeria is actually very, very unhealthy. Looking at, we are actually operating on our debt, looking at our deficit for quite a number of years. The budget of the year have always been run on deficit. We borrow more than we actually generate. So at a point like this, what is the government of the day looking into? What are we planning to do about our foreign exchange? Because we can see that a lot of things are happening. Just like I said, that the value of any particular currency is determined by the market forces based on the trade, investment, tourism, and the geopolitical risks. Now, they said every time here we have a tourist that visit the country, for example, they must buy goods and services in the local currency, just like I said earlier. Therefore, they have to exchange their currency to that of the country which they are visiting. For instance, if I am visiting the US, I have to actually change my Naira to the US dollars, so I will be able to buy goods and also buy services. So you can imagine what that will do to our country. But that can only be possible if we actually, talking about producing more than we import. Because looking at the fact that we are looking at stopping the payment of the first subsidy, that means we're looking at producing the crude oil and also refining the crude oil here in the country. With that, we don't have to actually change our Naira to the dollar, so we could be able to buy the fuel we actually use and also to buy the gas in the country. So you know that this is a very, very important, issue that the Nigerian government cannot just neglect at a time like this. Because looking at the fact that business and is actually been crumbling, lots of people. We had just last week, the World Bank has given us a hint about recession globally. Now, you know that it's important that inwardly Nigeria look into what she can do to make sure that she lift head and shoulders above other nations at a time like this, where we are seeing that industries are laying off workers. We are seeing that households have reduced the means of how much they spend in their houses, utensils, groceries, and all of that are actually consuming lots. So it's important that inwardly Nigeria look into what she can do to make sure that she lives floated above the recession period. And that's why, for example, in the US presently, we can see that people are actually spending much more than they have actually expected that they would spend. Inflation from last year has been really, really, especially in 2022, we saw that the recession is higher than any other year. So that is to show that we have to look into how we can stop the fuel subsidy, and also looking at our exchange rate. And that's why we have experts and analysts saying that the CBN, rather than concentrating on our interest rate, why don't we concentrate on looking at our exchange rate and also looking at our inflation rate, because that is really telling on the lives of its citizens, on goods, on services, on transportation, on every other thing we do in the country. To a large extent, it's actually dependent on the foreign exchange at a point in time. So it's important that the government of the day look inwardly in what she can do to make sure that our foreign exchange is being stable. We need to look at how can we equate the naira to the dollar at a time like this, because for any nation to actually brag with developed countries presently, we have to look into what is the currency presently. Just today on the paper, we saw that our naira is getting weak by the day. So it's important that we look, what can we do at a time like this, because CBN is seeing how they can increase the, the monetary rate, and, the higher the monetary rate is being increased, the higher it will actually turn on the lives of citizens. That is to show that if you are going to borrow money from commercial banks, you have to pay a certain percentage when it comes to interest, and that is really not, sitting very well with lots of citizens of the country at a time like this. So it's important that the government of the day actually look into how she can actually stabilize the foreign exchanges, and looking at the fact that we make the country very conducive so that we can have investors coming into the country to invest. With that, our GDP will actually, hit up. Another issue I'd like us to look into is the fact that Nigerians are paying about 2.8 trillion naira bills electronically, and they have transferred about 19.4 trillion naira with their mobile phones. This is something that the CBN have been agitating and been pushing forward to. Here we have that statistics from the Nigeria Interbank and Settlement System has revealed a 53% rise in the values of bills paid online, otherwise known as e-bills. And specifically, the latest NIBSS data revealed that the value of bills paid through electronic channel in 2022 rose to 2.8 trillion naira from 2.3 trillion naira recorded in 2021. And for those who are not very familiar, the e-bills pay is an account-based online real-time product that facilitates the payment of bills from one account to another. It ensures instant credit of payment and receipt of collection on behalf of the bidders, merchandise, and recruited on the the platform. And we see currently lots of people actually going into the electronic e-bills, talking about paying for their utility bills, cable subscription, hotel booking, school fees, and all of that, especially in relation to what we see the CBN and has been doing, looking at the fact that they want more people to be into the e-naira business rather than transacting through just cash. People have actually move into the e-bills, and this is really a right step forward to reduce the handling of raw cash in your hands, and actually to reduce debt to a minimal as much as possible. So we can see that lots of Nigerians are actually keen into that, and we have realized about 2.8 trillion naira electronically. And I think this is the right way forward, because just last week, Monday, we saw where the CBN, implemented the minimum withdrawal bills, which was for 500,000 for individuals. And then we saw 5 million naira for companies and commercials. And looking at the way Nigerians are actually keen into this electronically, to actually tell you that lots of Nigerians are beginning to see the use of the e-bills, and we're really happy that lots of Nigerians are, moving there, because according to that, more Nigerians are now embracing the payment of the bills electronically as opposed to paying with cash. And we have here, they said, besides customers transfer about 19.4 trillion naira via mobile in 2022. And then that is to show it's even higher than that of 2021, where we had just 8 trillion naira worth of transaction. So you can see there's a step forward looking at the more, Nigerians are seeing how they can actually key into the e-naira, and this is something that the CBN have been working tirelessly to make sure that more, individuals are keen into that. And we can see it is telling from the numbers, because numbers do not lie. So it's telling from the statistics here that we're having more Nigerians keen into the e-bill and prefer to actually do most of their transactions using the e-naira. And I am actually happy because more of people are doing that actually at a time like this, where we are having the limit of cash you can withdraw and looking at theft and all of this that is happening. So I think this is actually in a way to make sure that more Nigerians, for those who are yet to actually key into the e-bill, should do much more than that. Even though we have a concern coming from the Association of the Licensed Telecommunication Operation of Nigeria that said that they have an accumulated debt from unconstructed supplementary service, which is the USSD, which we mostly use when we want to transfer. It will be recalled that in 2021 March, we had the Minister of Information, Peitami, where he said that we'll be paying like about 6.98 naira for each transaction. But then they are having an issue because they are owing most of the banks about 80, trillion worth of transaction. And this is really very, very sad at a time like this, where they are hoping to recover their money. But then we can see that lots of banks actually owing most of these service providers especially. So it's important that the banks do something, because there's a threat coming from this licensed telecommunication operators. They want to actually withdraw some of their services. That is to show that if you tell them customers, imagine how much you have to pay for every transaction you do. Most of us, when that 6.98 naira was actually implemented, we had lots of concern and we're not happy about it, because it's actually going to turn on us. But then we can see that there have been a back and forth between the service providers and also the banks. So the minister is actually wanting most of the banks to actually play their own part of the the bargain by making sure they remit the debt that they are actually owing the service providers, or the service providers will withdraw their services and customers will have a problem doing their transaction at a time where we are excited that e-bill is actually coming to stay. But if the service providers will withdraw their services, then that will really be detrimental for Nigeria at a time like this, where we want to actually rub shoulders with some of the developed countries in the world presently. So I just hope that the banks will actually play their part and actually pay their debt that they are owing these service providers. Now lastly, we would like to look at world recession. It's no longer news. Last week, on Wednesday precisely, there was a threat or possibly a warning coming from the World Bank that there might be, or there will be, a global recession. And it's very important that we look into that, because they say that the global growth is about 1.7%, and we have 2.9% for Nigeria. The global economy may slide into recession this year if there's a resurgence of the COVID-19 and escalation of the ongoing Russia and Ukraine war. The World Bank has warned in its latest global economy prospect report released in Washington, D.C., American. It's important because we still have a new variant coming from China, where we have the COVID-19 there. And then we are actually afraid that if there's a resurgence of the COVID-19, recently in Nigeria, we recorded about 42 new cases of the COVID-19. And it's really, really scary because a lot needs to be done. The NCDC also have to look into their indices. What are some of the measures that need to be done? Because we don't want to rebound back to what happened during the COVID-19, where lots of companies, lots of businesses had to go downgraded as a result of the recession and as a result of the pandemic. So it's very important that Nigeria, just like every other country, is looking into what they can do to live afloat during this recession. Especially the likes of US and China have been doing something in regards to that. And earlier, if you were following, where I told you that most households in the US have actually increased their livelihood because some of them have to spend much more than they have budgeted. Looking at during the celebration, we had the Christmas, the New Year, down to when businesses are trying to bounce back from the celebration. So a lot needs to be done to make sure that the numbers will actually not be telling on people, because if there's recession, we know that already inflation has been there, and then our foreign exchange in the country for various countries. So this is based on how can we actually, be afforded at a time like this? What is Nigeria presently doing to make sure that she's living afforded during the time? And we can see that they say altogether, the World Bank believes that the growth outlook risks are tinted to the downside, while the risk of policy misstep remains elevated, because we saw some of the ways that the World Bank is actually looking on how we can live afforded during the recession. It's looking at the climate change. If you recall last year during the COP29, this is part of what was discussed about the climate change, some of the countries that were affected by the flooding. And just recently, we saw where Ukraine and Nigeria is trying to have a talk about how they will be able to bring in some food into Nigeria. And on the papers, we saw where Nigeria is actually having the best fertilizer. But the questions here will be, based on recession, is depending on where you live in the world presently, because where you live will actually tell how far or how much you will be affected by the recession presently. For people who are living in Nigeria, China, US, you could actually tell based on the currency in your country, how will the recession affect you. We saw a lot about the food crisis of Nigeria as a result of the flood that came in last year, September. We saw the last inflation rate, which was about 21.99. And then lots of other numbers are actually telling about how much this recession will actually affect us. But then, just as usual, every other recession that we always have a way of bouncing back. Like here in Nigeria, for the past two recessions, we have, agriculture has always been the sector that have bailed us out. And I think this will be the time where Nigerian government has to look into how she can key into the agriculture, give more to the agriculture. And at a time where we have just 1% mechanization, just 10% animal power, and then we have about 89% of human power, that a lot needs to be done. So if we want to live afforded, talking about food crisis, a lot needs to be done in the agri sector. And then we also have to look at our oil and gas sector, fixing our refineries. And then most people are giving, analysts and experts are giving other ways, because at the time during recession, we see companies laying off workers. We'll see that lots of prices, goods and services will increase their prices, of course, because lots of things are happening. And they'll be looking at picking up other businesses, investment, looking into other investment that will affect you. And then we have some of them here that say looking into core portfolio holdings. For those into portfolios, equities and all of that, you could tell that. And then trending market movement, future innovations, and then we also look at the portfolio protection. So these are some of the businesses, investment that experts and actually analysts are actually suggesting how we can live afforded during the recession to make sure that it doesn't affect us in any way. So I just hope that every business, every company is actually prepared for the future, for whatever we are foreseeing, because a lot is going to happen. So it's very important that we put our hands together, not just in the country, but globally. Just like we have various conferences that are being held, what can we do to live afforded during the recession? So I hope that we have actually taken all of this into cognizance, and I hope that we brace up ourselves for whatever is coming to make sure that we don't get affected or being pushed to the edge during the war recession. Well, that is how far I can go on the show this afternoon. Thank you so much for always keeping the date with me. Remember to follow us on all our social media handles, and then you can drop your contributions and also your comment on what you think is happening on the business and financial space. Until I come your way again next week, Monday, do have a blessed afternoon.